The flight from England to Argentina was already unusual before it even left the ground, though at the time, nobody saw it that way. It was an overnight international route operated by an older aircraft recently returned to service after months of storage and interior restoration. Most passengers never paid attention to details like that. To them, it was simply another long flight across the Atlantic, one more crowded journey filled with carry-on bags, sleeping passengers, and the quiet exhaustion that always settled over airports after midnight. The man seated in 22A had boarded early and immediately noticed that his section of the cabin looked slightly older than the rest of the plane. The leather on the seats around him felt worn in a way that didn't match the newer rows farther ahead, and even the overhead lighting seemed dimmer near the window where he sat. Still, none of it felt important. He placed his bag beneath the seat, fastened his seatbelt, and prepared for the long, overnight journey to Buenos Aires. Flight attendants moved through the aisles serving drinks, while passengers adjusted blankets and prepared to sleep. The engines hummed steadily beneath the floor, creating the kind of quiet background noise that eventually made hours disappear without notice. For the first part of the journey, everything felt completely normal. Several hours into the flight, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, the passenger in 22A dropped his phone between the armrest and the side of the seat. It was a small accident, the kind that happens on almost every flight. Annoyed but half asleep, he reached down into the narrow gap to retrieve it. That was when he felt something strange beneath the seat. At first he assumed it was part of the seat mechanism, some exposed metal hidden beneath the cushion supports. But the surface felt smooth, almost polished, and completely separate from the surrounding structure. Curious now, he used the flashlight on his phone to look deeper under the seat. There was a small handle hidden beneath the floor panel directly below 22A. It didn't look modern. The metal was dark and worn with age, unlike anything else in the cabin. It looked older than the aircraft itself, almost as though it belonged to something installed decades earlier and forgotten. For several seconds, he simply stared at it, unsure whether he should touch it at all. Then curiosity won. He pulled the handle carefully. A soft clicking sound came from beneath the floor. To his surprise, a narrow section under the seat shifted slightly upward, revealing a hidden compartment. The movement was smooth despite its age, as if the mechanism had been maintained over the years. Inside was a box. It was small, dark wooden, reinforced with faded metal corners and secured with an old clasp. The wood looked aged enough to belong in a museum rather than beneath an airplane seat. There were no labels, no airline markings, nothing identifying how it had gotten there. The passenger looked around instinctively. Carefully, he lifted the box onto his lap. It was heavier than it looked. The surface carried faint scratches and discoloration from age, and carved into the top was a symbol he didn't recognize, a circular design surrounding what looked like wings or feathers. For a moment, he considered calling a flight attendant immediately, but curiosity pulled him further. The box didn't look dangerous. If anything, it looked forgotten. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a collection of objects wrapped carefully in aged fabric. Beneath the cloth sat several old photographs, yellowed papers, and what appeared to be a leather journal, worn nearly smooth from time. The photographs caught his attention first. They showed passengers standing beside an aircraft unlike any modern plane, an early model from decades earlier. The people in the pictures wore formal clothing typical of another era, smiling stiffly beside the plane as if posing before departure. But one detail felt wrong. Every photograph included the same seat number written faintly in the corner. 22A. The passenger frowned, turning the photos over one by one. Different people appeared in each image, taken at different times, yet the same number was always present somewhere within the frame. Then he opened the journal. Most of the pages were handwritten in faded ink, difficult to read under the dim cabin lighting. The entries described flights crossing the Atlantic during the early 20th century, long before modern commercial aviation became common. The writing belonged to someone who repeatedly mentioned carrying the box aboard different aircraft over many years. At first, the entry sounded ordinary, almost historical. Then the tone changed. The later pages became paranoid and unsettled. The writer described hearing knocking sounds beneath airplane floors during flights over the ocean, passengers disappearing briefly from their seats and returning with no memory of leaving, shadows standing at the ends of empty aisles during overnight crossings. And always, the same line appeared again and again throughout the journal. Never leave the box beneath seat 22A during the crossing. The passenger reading the journal felt a chill move through him, despite the warm cabin air. Then the lights flickered. It lasted less than a second, just a brief interruption in the cabin lighting, but when the lights stabilized again, something had changed. The seat beside him was no longer empty. An elderly man now sat quietly in 22B. The passenger was certain the seat had been empty for most of the flight. The old man wore dark clothing that looked strangely outdated, and his attention remained fixed on the wooden box resting on the tray table. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the old man slowly turned toward him. His expression remained calm, almost tired, but there was something deeply unsettling in his eyes. Without looking away from the box, he quietly said, "It should not be open over the ocean." The passenger froze. The voice was calm and clear, yet something about it felt distant, almost detached from the surrounding sounds of the cabin. Before he could respond, the old man continued staring toward the box and added, "That is how they followed the flights." The engines outside suddenly sounded louder, or perhaps the cabin had become quieter. The passenger looked around, noticing that most of the people nearby were still asleep, unaware of anything unusual. When he turned back toward 22B, the old man was still sitting there, motionless. Then the aircraft hit turbulence. The sudden movement shook the cabin hard enough to wake nearby passengers. The box nearly slid from the tray table, and instinctively, the passenger grabbed it before it could fall. At that exact moment, the old man seized his wrist tightly. His hand was freezing cold. The passenger stared in shock as the old man leaned closer and whispered only one sentence. "Close it before they see the light." Then the cabin lights failed completely. Darkness swallowed the aircraft. Gasps rose throughout the cabin as only the emergency floor lighting remained, casting long, dim shadows across the aisle. Somewhere farther back, a passenger screamed briefly before falling silent again. The passenger in 22A looked toward the window and felt his stomach tighten. Outside the aircraft, moving through the clouds beside the plane, were shapes. Large, dark forms pacing the aircraft silently through the night sky. He immediately shut the box. The moment the clasp locked, the cabin lights returned. The turbulence stopped, and the shapes outside vanished into the darkness. Breathing heavily, he turned back toward seat 22B. It was empty again. The rest of the flight passed without incident. No further turbulence occurred, and eventually the aircraft landed safely in Buenos Aires just after sunrise. After passengers disembarked, airport authorities inspected the hidden compartment beneath 22A, but the box was gone. No maintenance records mentioned any hidden storage beneath the seat, and according to the airline, the aircraft interior had been completely rebuilt years earlier. The passenger later searched through aviation archives and eventually discovered something disturbing. Multiple aircraft crossing the Atlantic during the early 20th century had reported unexplained disappearances connected to one recurring detail buried deep in old records. Seat 22A. And every incident involved passengers claiming to see strange shapes outside the aircraft over open ocean. No explanation was ever found. But even years later, whenever he boarded another overnight flight across the Atlantic, he never chose a seat anywhere near row 22.